Hello everyone, I'm Dr.Animaction, and these are my Randimated Thoughts, the show where I take the opportunity to say whatever pops into my head about whatever topic I choose. I want to start this episode with a quick explanation. I know there are channels out there that delve into the history and behind-the-scenes details of a property, but that's not really what I want to do here. I also know that some channels take a thorough look at things like production values and techniques and critically examine a series, but I don't want to do that either. All I really want to do with these shows is talk about what made them special, what they did for the kids who watched them, and why they should be remembered and cherished today. For this first episode, I'm choosing to begin the same place that my love of 80s action cartoons in general began, with G.I. Joe. I want to take a few minutes and talk about the real question. Specifically, I want to ask, what made G.I. Joe so important? The original Sunbow G.I. Joe, Real American Hero cartoon came out in September of 1983. It was followed by a second animated series from DiC that released in 1989. But we'll talk about that in its own entity in a future episode. For now, let's just focus on the 2 seasons and 96 episodes of the Sunbow run. It's widely regarded as one of the first animated series of the 30-minute toy commercial phenomenon that spawned so many 80s properties, as the toy line was actually launched 2 years before the show first aired. There's some merit to this idea, as the original show heavily featured the characters from the second series of figures, relegating the more generic, similarly outfitted characters of the first series to minor roles. But even if that's the case, then the question really has to be, what's wrong with that? In modern times, we refer to a scenario as this as being a cross-media effort. But in the 80s, and especially for kids, toys were the media of the time. It was through these toys and associated cartoons, comics, whatever, that many of us interacted. After all, most of the times I went over to a friend's house as a kid was to play with their toys. So when G.I. Joe first aired, I was 5. It's funny because I don't really have a lot of memories throughout my early childhood. Not sure why, because I had a pretty good one overall, but I remember these cartoons. I remember the toys. Overall, my memories from that far back are pretty hazy, so it's hard to relate any specific life moments to the animation itself. But I know that I was watching G.I. Joe even that young. That part I'm sure of because I do have a very specific memory of bringing my snow job figure and ram cycle to show and tell in kindergarten. It stuck with me all this time because of the tragic events that ensued, as a young child dropped his figure's backpack and skis somewhere outside during a typically snowy western New York winter, never to see them again. I also remember 2 of the 4 pegs on the side of the ram that hold the figure's legs getting broken. There are a lot of these throughout my adolescent years that are clear in my head, like watching my dad put stickers on a new tomahawk on Christmas morning, or breaking the thumb on my Slaughter's Marauders barbecue. I can't recall sitting in front of the TV for any single episode of the cartoon as it aired, but watching any of them brings back the knowledge that I've done so before. All it takes is hearing Duke yell "Yo Joe" at the beginning of an episode to reinforce the certainty that this series has always been a part of my life. I don't know if it's that way for anyone else, though I can only imagine it is. But for me, that's what makes G.I. Joe important. The ethereal certainty of a childhood connection that goes beyond just remembering having played with the toys. For me, 80s cartoons, and specifically G.I. Joe, have the same effect as a familiar smell or song. So I guess that means the only thing to do now is try and figure out the source of this phenomenon. Honestly, I think the answer is pretty simple. These cartoons and their associated media and products spurred imagination. They're the perfect catalyst to the perfect time. I've got kids of my own, and they don't wax nostalgic about the cartoons of their youth the way I do. Sure, they remember episodes and plots, but I remember feelings. I've talked to other people of generations after mine about the heroes of their childhoods, and in my personal experience, it's rare that any of them relate as strongly as I relate to mine. And I think the reason behind that is the 80s kids and 80s properties were the perfect combination at the perfect time. But why G.I. Joe specifically? Well, because I'm me. I have no doubt that other cartoons resonated more strongly with other people. I had friends that preferred Transformers or Voltron or whatever, the heathens. But really, it may be because my dad was an Army veteran and a pretty patriotic guy. Could be because I had an older brother that collected the G.I. Joe comics and had a bunch of the figures himself. Who knows? Maybe it's because G.I. Joe was far more grounded in reality than any other cartoon. It was about military guys fighting evil at the height of the real-world Cold War. They flew jets that looked like the ones in Top Gun. Yeah, they fought against world-conquering plots involving weather manipulation or destroying all of the world's money or robbing Fort Knox through a tunnel that everyone just kind of forgot about, but they were still just soldiers. At the end of the day, any of us could have actually been a G.I. Joe. And that's where I think G.I. Joe has the edge against the other 80s cartoons. The intersection of imagination and possibility was unique to this series. I may never have been able to be a Thundercat, but I could be a paratrooper. So in my humble opinion, that's why G.I. Joe was so important to us 80s kids and has remained a part of our particular cultural zeitgeist. I've heard the show described as overly patriotic or even jingoistic, but I don't think that's the case. No episode was overly preachy about patriotism, and it rarely focused on the pure Americanism at its core. I'm sure the Action Force fans out there can verify. This was even emphasized by a shift in later series from a real American hero to the far less centralized and international hero. I don't think it mattered that they were military, or even that they were American. What mattered is that the show spurred imaginings of good versus evil in a way that kids could honestly see themselves growing into. It's that relationship between fantasy and reality that makes this show so important, and lodges these memories so tightly in my head. Or maybe not. I'm a fake doctor, not a real psychologist. All I do know for sure is that for a huge part of the population of a certain age, the phrase, "so now you know," will always elicit the appropriate response of, "and knowing is half the battle," even if they don't necessarily remember why. So those are my thoughts on why G.I. Joe was so important. If you have anything to add or anything to contest or whatever, I think it's an interesting topic to discuss, so let's do that below. Anyway, like the big YouTube kids say, like, comment, subscribe, bell. I'm hoping to do one of these videos every weekish, assuming the necessities of real life don't get in the way. So if you actually want to see more, stay tuned. And stay tuned. Because cartoons, like animation. Anyway, later.